I am John Kaehny. I am the Executive Director of reInvent Albany and the co-chair of the New York City Transparency Working Group. And this is the first time I've ever been here or before this audience of folks. And it's a big day for me because this is almost like meeting a new tribe for the first time. You know, I walk down the same streets, but I don't necessarily know who you are, which is an amazing thing because my organization and some of the folks in this room, including Noel, the representatives from City Council, the representative from New York Public Interest Research Group, and others have been fighting very, very hard to make New York City the best place in the world for government open data. And so we really have an extraordinary kind of cross-fertilization of people here right now. At least for me, it's extraordinary. You may not feel that yet, but we're going to get there. I'm going to talk today about New York City open data. Governmental open data. I'm not going to talk about academic institutions and organizational open data. We call it openorg.org. It's a different project because I want to get to Q&A as fast as we can, but I also want to cover a lot of stuff. So I'm also not going to talk so much about government analytics and the incredible different uses of internal data and external data that government is now engaged in, and many people in this room too, because that's also a whole big topic. So those are my little disclaimers. Before we jump into, though, open data, the nitty-gritty and kind of the view from the trenches, let me just tell you a little bit about the big themes I'm going to go through. And these are universal to open data efforts and really the free sharing of information. So data equals sign quantitative information, tabular data. So yes, someone always asks, what about video? You know, what about text? True, it's all data to the computer. We know that. But for the sake of this conversation in New York City open data law, I'm going to stick within this little silo right now and talk about tabular data. Some big themes here. Great expectations. Expectations are really the key to social, political change. That is changes in public expectations and governmental expectations. This is a huge thing, and this is going to be my most underlying theme of everything I talk about, which is changing expectations and adopting new expectations. Just a little parenthetical statement. This is going great, and this is the best part of open data right now in New York City and probably the world, which is the huge change in expectations amidst the public, the fact that there's rooms like this and people here expect to be able to go online and get data from government, and that is now permeated into the City Council. I mean, folks, we have 4 key people from City Council here with us today, which is a sign of how robust New York's governmental open data culture is, or at least part of it. So I think this is a really good thing and something to get excited about. I'm going to climb into the trench in a second, so I'm kind of putting the hype up front before the dismal science creeps in here. Other big themes, though, culture, law, code. When is law not law? You know, everybody knows the term code is law, and a lot of people think that law is law, but law is not law. What do I mean by that? I mean that we pass a lot of laws, we being Americans and New York City and New York State and the federal government, that are never obeyed. They actually don't do anything at all, and this is really important. So we're going to talk about this. Continuous improvement, the agile policy process. I think one of the things that is super duper important when you're looking at open data or other areas of public policy is the mechanism for change and evolution and feedback and continuous improvement. I love agile development as a software approach, and I think that it is a mindset that government needs to adopt and that advocates need to expect. So I like the idea of agile policy development or agile governance in that way. Trusted or privileged users versus the data masses. So this is a pretty elite audience, and I'm speaking to you, though, as a member of the data masses, not as the part of the data elite. And one of the things I want you to leave you with here is to think about all the data that you have access to that the public doesn't. And this is a really, really big deal when you talk about fairness and equality, fair treatment by government, which is access to information and data. And one of the biggest phenomena, and I'm gonna kill my own punchline here for this whole story right up front, one of the biggest phenomena in open data in New York City is the dog that did not bark. And the dog that didn't bark is you, the folks in this audience. That is all the privileged data users and the trusted data users, the domain experts that we thought were going to burst out of the woodwork when we passed the open data law and demand better, more data from government, and it has not happened. And this is the biggest surprise by far for people who advocated for open data. That is all the people at CUSP, all the people at the Columbia Data Center, all the people at NGOs who are giant data consumers did not come running out and say to people like Brad Reed from City Council or Jimmy Vaca, the head of the technology committee, "Where's my data?" It ain't happening because you are being fed in a way that the public is not being fed. And you're being fed through MOUs, non-disclosure agreements, contracts, all kinds of privileged data arrangements with government that the public doesn't know about, doesn't have access to, and is a whole, what I would say, non-public alternate data universe that is kind of parallel to the open data regime. And I want to talk about this, and we'll talk about this more during Q&A, but for this particular audience, it's a very, very important thing. And the reason it's so important is because your voices, and I'm going to lump you all together here unfairly, your voices are not being added to the public call for open data, okay? Generally, City Council, the state legislature, the people in the mayor's office who deal with open data are not hearing so much from you as demanders. They're hearing from you as providers and collaborators, and that's a very, very important thing. The big surprise, the dog did not bark. I just hit that. But what I'm going to try to do here is to just hit on what I think of as the sociological, political, cultural, technological inputs into open data and try to make some coherence of them and explain to you why some things are changing fast, why some things are not changing, and what our expectations are, and really how we can go real fast, real soon, if we have some more voices speaking out about this issue. Before I do that, though, I want to just gather some data myself just about who we are in this room right now, and then I'll tell you a little bit about myself very, very quickly. So I want to just zoom through some questions, and I'm asking you to raise your hands and be honest in your response. I don't think there'll be a stigma to any of these. I hope not. And just raise your hands for a show of hands. Do you live in New York City? Do you not live in New York City? Okay. Do you vote in New York City? Okay. Do you know what community board you live in? The number of the community board? Uh-huh. Okay. Do you know the name of your city council member? Pretty good. Have you ever spoken or communicated with your city council member or their office? Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Okay. Have you made a complaint to 311? Aha. Lots of people. Have you made more than one complaint to 311? Lots of people. Have you made a complaint in the last 6 months? Interesting. Okay. So people are, okay, so we'll keep going. Do you get data that you use in the course of your work for data analysis from New York City government websites? Lots of people. How about the open data portal itself? Lots of people. Okay. Have you filed a Freedom of Information request? A lot of people have. Interesting. Do you get data from a city agency that's not available to the public? Okay. We're looking at you. We're interested in you. Do you analyze data for the government in some form? Professional, voluntarily? A lot of people. Interesting. Okay. Do you work for the government? Okay. Do you work for a government that's not New York City government? Anybody? Okay. One person. Does the availability or non-availability of data in the open data portal or on agency websites directly affect your work? Is it something you notice? A lot of people. Okay, interesting. So that's all the data that I wanted to get from you, and I think that's the end of the program. I had my lunch, and we'll be moving on. No, that's just the beginning of getting an understanding of how people interact with government. So I don't know if folks noticed, but far more people have used 311 by a lot than have ever been in touch with their city council member's office. That's a really interesting thing that I will point out, both from an open data perspective and from a democracy perspective, because what it means is that city council is no longer the first place you go to complain about something in the basic delivery of government services. And that's interesting because that's a technological intermediary that's controlled by the mayor. Okay, so that's just a shift I'm going to point to, and I'm pointing to it because 311 is the biggest and most important data set in the city's open data portal, and it's one of the biggest deals and the biggest. We're not doing questions now. Sorry, but I'll get to that. So reInvent Albany, in a nutshell, we're a now 6-year-old advocacy group. We have a staff of 4 to 5 people. and we work on state government transparency and open government issues, including open data, freedom of information law. We're the folks that got the state of New York to implement its Open NY open data program. We also work on watchdogging government spending and lead fights on issues like raids on MTA funding under our fiscal accountability program, and work with the comptroller and the Attorney General's office on improving their transparency websites. So we're all about transparency and open government and policy change and legislative change there and watchdogging that. On the city level, we co-chair the New York City Transparency Working Group, which is a coalition of the civic groups and some civic technology groups. We have some representatives with us today. The main civic technology representation there, or from your community, would probably be Beta NYC and Knoll. So Knoll is your kind of representative of sorts and voice and liaison with the old line good government groups like Citizens Union or Common Cause or League of Women Voters. And Kathy Gray just walked in from League of Women Voters and is here somewhere. Hi, Kathy. So, so the Transparency Working Group is an important forum because it's supposed to be the place where good government advocates learn from civic technologists and vice versa, and we have a synergy. And it's a pretty cool thing, and it's the group that was really behind the passage of the Open Data Law in 2012. And we'll get into that in just a second. But that's kind of where we are. As Noel mentioned, me, John Kaehny, I was head of the Transportation Alternatives for about 10 years from 1994 to 2004. That's how I know about freedom of information law and how it works and doesn't work. And that's how I got exposed to open data, which we didn't call open data then. But and mapping for advocacy and for social change purposes. And so after I left Transportation Alternatives, I had a consulting firm that worked on, of all things, parking policy and land use and sustainable transportation for big NGOs, internationally, nationally, and locally here, and did lots and lots of work with big data sets that people here are familiar with, like Pluto and Acris and stuff like that. So that was fun times. And then I got the advocacy bug back and drank too much beer one night and started a new advocacy group called Reinvent Albany with some colleagues a few years ago. So, to open data. I define open data as a philosophy and a practice, both. That public data produced by the government should be published online by the government in an easy to find, easy to download, easy to use form. You could simplify that as user-friendly form if you want to. Public data. Now, what is public data? Public data is data subject to disclosure under freedom of information law, and which does not impinge excessively on personal privacy. And this is a big unresolved issue, so that you can add into your questions you want to answer during your scholarship or research is privacy and open data, and the difference between freedom of information law and open data, and why in practice it's turned out that open data has been less open than the information and the data released under freedom of information law. Turns out people get more skittish when data is put on a website than when they know other people can just get it, but they don't know the other people are getting it. You follow me on that? Okay. So putting stuff online is a starker form of disclosure than what the public is usually used to, and when they find out about it, they tend to get more concerned. I'm flagging this because this is a major political concern in city council and the state legislature when you talk about disclosure and transparency laws and personally identifiable information. I think Brad will back me up on that one. So why am I going to talk about open data law? I mean, who cares? It's a law. There's lots of laws. I'm going to talk about it because it's the central organizing focus of advocacy, of governmental movement, and of societal attention. It's the single center of gravity for pushing open data in New York City. And New York City is one of the open data leaders in the entire world. We were the first place to pass an open data law in the entire world, 2012. So that shows you how close we are to the beginning of the big change, though. 2012 is not that long ago. We were all born after that. And it's just happening. So globally important. I love using words like globally important when they're actually true. So New York City is actually looked at a lot, and I'll share this with you because it's totally cool. Since we passed the open data law, I've probably met with 24 government officials from countries around the world who come as part of State Department-sponsored visits and paid for by their own governments to come and say, how did New York City do this, and why are they doing this? So this is not just blowing smoke, though it's fun to do. People actually think what we're doing here is cool, and they want to be like us. So hopefully they'll only watch the beginning part of this webcast and not the later part of it. But the open data law is not the end-all. So disclaimer here, there's a ton of government data online, as we all know, that's not on the open data portal. There's very, very important spending and budget website data available on places like Checkbook 2.0, the comptroller's website, and at the state level on the state comptroller's open book site or the Attorney General's New York Open Government site, just to provide examples for our local and city government. And of course, we all know about data.gov, which is a big thing. So, and federated with our data. Let me just hit on a couple things. If you think about the New York City open data law as an animal, which is always the way I think about it, then its ancestors would be this. 1967, Federal Freedom of Information Law passes. This hugely important because it philosophically establishes as policy that the information is assumed, government information is assumed to be open by default, okay? That is a big, big statement to make, and that is the fundamental philosophical policy statement behind every idea we have about open government, right there. 1967, you know what was happening in the United States in 1967, a lot of change, and that's when the first Freedom of Information Law that passed and stuck passed. The state of New York passed its own, which is modeled on the federal one in the early 70s. Can't remember the year. And then fast forwarding to 1989, this amazing thing happens in City Council. The City Council passes this revolutionary law. And if anybody is doing any studies on comparative politics or, stuff that was super cool but never happened, this is your paper right here. 1989, COPIC, the Committee on Public Information and Communications, was created. It is visionary. It calls for proactive disclosure, basically, of all government data and all government records. This is 1989, right? We didn't even have the internet in 1989. And it's calling for the creation of data dictionary and public release of absolutely everything. It's like the Universal Super Duper Open Data Act of 1989. It's called COPIC. It didn't happen. This is a big thing to know about because it didn't happen because society wasn't ready for it, the political system wasn't ready for it, the government wasn't ready for it, and there were no strong stakeholder groups that were there to fight for it. And that law is still on the books right now, and it's still theoretically in place, but it's never actually been implemented. So all the way back to 89. So law does not equal sign law. In other words, passing the law doesn't change everything, right? The people have to be asking for the thing. This may seem really self-evident to people. Maybe, I don't know. It wasn't to me when I learned that when you pass laws, they don't mean anything until people scream and shout and support them. But that's the truth of it. 2009, President Obama's White House Open Government Executive Order is issued right after he comes in. This is a big thing. Everyone around the country says, wow, he's put it all in one place. There were a lot of New Yorkers that were behind that who later worked on the open data law here. But this is a big, big inspiration, and this kind of brings open data into focus as a real concept from kind of a nebulous thing. So, and then New York City Big Apps Competition 2009 puts out data sets online and challenges people to do something cool with them and actually provides money and support and real marketing for it. So these are the ancestors for the 2012 New York City Open Data Law, which is introduced by Gail Brewer, who also helped pass the revolutionary 1989 law. Gail Brewer, she's the godmother of open data in New York City. Very, very important force, now Manhattan Borough President. So what happens is the open data law and open data bill are kind of going nowhere. People don't know what to make of it. It's just kind of a thing in city council. Who cares? There's a lot of bills. And this new group comes along, mine, needs something to do that's cool because we want to get something done quick. It's totally teed up to happen we work with our colleagues and we pass this open data law in an extraordinary series of negotiations between, and this is webcast, so I'll say this, but negotiations which I wish were webcast because you would think they were amazing, in which advocates, civil society groups like ours, were on one side of the table with the mayor's technology agency do it, and on the other side of the table was the city's law department. And it was, so part of the city was on the team of the advocates, was team change, and the other side was team stuck in mud. And it was a big fight, and we had lots of meetings. And the open data law that we have right now is the result of that big fight. So the open data law is a compromise. And the place where we did not win on the open data law is we do not have any enforcement mechanism. We have nothing that makes agencies obey the law. And this is very, very important because agencies are not obeying the law. What we hoped for was public outcry, name and shame, and city council oversight to put pressure on agencies to change. So, and this was a big fight at the time. So this is a recognized flaw in the New York City open data law that city council, and I'll get to this in a second, moved to correct just last year in a big way. So what does the open data law do? It essentially does a couple things. It says, agencies, you have to put together a list of all your data sets. First, it defines what open data is. Big deal. It says open data is public data, and it has a big definition for public data. Public data is tabular data that's released under FOIL and has some other qualifications on it. But basically, it uses the legal regime of the Freedom of Information Law. So that's really important. So when you're working on open data anywhere in the world, one of the things you got to know is there a underlying Freedom of Information law that provides regulatory support and definitions and case law for this concept of open data. Because open data law itself is pretty short because we already have this Freedom of Information law and case law that's 40 years old and is voluminous and gets into all kinds of privacy issues. So a lot of the philosophical issues about privacy, disclosure of things that endanger critical infrastructure or security or these things have been covered again and again in lawsuits under FOIL. So that's an important thing to understand about this. So defines open data and public data, tells agencies they need to put together a list of their data sets, and gives them a deadline of 2018 for publishing all that data, and a schedule that they need to make to explain how they're going to get those public data sets online by 2018. It also creates a portal, which is real important, and on the technology side is, you know, a fundamental thing of great disagreement and discussion, but it creates an open data portal that all the data sets have to go onto, and it gives discretion to the city's technology agency to create a technical standards manual that fills in all the gritty details on that. So Andrew Nicklin, who just walked in, wrote the technical standards manual. So we got everybody here today. So the law gives a lot of flexibility for how you implement the open data law. Now, in 2015, very quickly, and I'm going to get off the regulatory legal thing in just a moment. In 2015, the city council passed 5 bills, which Brad Reed wrote, probably actually physically wrote, based on scrawlings on napkins and stuff. And those laws are an attempt to put teeth into the open data law by making agencies more accountable, establishing standards for geospatial data, which didn't exist before and were a big mess, giving agencies deadlines for responding to requests for data release, and doing a variety of other things that are supposed to help open data along. On the legal fight, I'll just say this. The big ask for my group and for other groups that want teeth in open data is what's called a private right of action. That is the ability of a member of the public to file a lawsuit, a civil procedure lawsuit against an agency for not complying with the open data law, which is something that exists for Freedom of Information law. It's called the Article 78 proceeding, and it's what you use when the government won't give you the records that you ask for under Freedom of Information. We don't have something comparable for the open data law, so what we can do is name and shame. We can tell city council to have hearings, and we can generally badger and prod and bother agencies into releasing the data we want. The good news here, the really cool good news, is that the open data law and the social organizing around it and the city council's education through the legislative process has created an incredibly robust open data culture in New York City on your side of the table. I mean, we have tons of people, tons of groups of many, many different backgrounds, some who are domain advocates for different parts of city activity, the transportation department, parks department, police department to be sure, housing, all of these things, who know about the open data law and are using it to ask for data release and machine readable data. So this is very healthy and very inspiring and the kind of thing that keeps us going. I think that if someone from the administration was here, from City Hall, de Blasio administration, they would say the arc of history here is fantastic. What are you guys are a bunch of whiners, go home and give it up and leave us alone. But the view from the trenches that I'm in is much more of overcoming everyday problems and being absolutely vexed by the incredible opportunities that open data offer that are not being realized right now. And the fact that the open data process is absolutely bedeviled, almost crippled right now by technical problems and by a lack of staffing. So I'm gonna complain for a moment, pardon, but here's what's going on when you actually go. So a couple things. The city's law says we're gonna use an open data portal, okay? You gotta put your data in the open data portal. Why did we do that? I'll just touch on that for a second. We did that because we wanted one standard for data for all agencies and establishing conventions for metadata and for all descriptions of data and data standards. And the mechanism for that is the open data portal. It's having one portal. Because bureaucratically, to go onto the agency level and compel agencies to change the data that they're hosting on their own websites is impossible. So the idea behind the open data portal, for all its problems, is it gives you a point at which you can regulate the data, the actual data, and it also gives you a vehicle. It gives you an ask so that when you are the administration, in this case the Department of Information Technology, it gives you something to do when you go to other agencies that makes them take action. It's a specific, discrete action. That is, give us data to put on the open data portal. Now, there's nothing intrinsically superior about an open data portal versus agencies hosting their own data on websites in a theoretical perfect world where everybody wants to put out their data. In fact, there are disadvantages to it because it creates a layer between the data owners at the agency level and the public who is consuming that data. But on balance, we and many other people think the open data portal is incredibly important for raising all boats here. And one of the key themes that I'm going to keep coming back to is one of the ideas behind the way we see open data is fairness. It's fairness of data availability and fairness of being able to find information regardless of where you're coming from. So the open data portal helps with that as a tool. Now, it so happens that right now, our open data portal has lots and lots of problems. And I'm not going to go into those, but others perhaps will during the Q&A or will opine about those problems. The problems are such that there's been endless discussions between advocates, civic technologists, and city government about the technology behind the portal and the fact that the search function doesn't work so well, the bulk download function doesn't work so well, et cetera. So the technology here, in some ways, is getting in the way of the policy when it comes to the open data portal. And that's something that we can touch on, but I wanted to just point out to people. So getting the actual data is a problem. Another problem is, and this is a huge problem, there's no way for the public to convey to an agency or to city government when there's a problem with the data that they're using. So if you're using 311 data and you find out that there are, 1 million potholes reported in Community Board 11 in 2014 and 0 reported in 2015, you probably know that there's a problem with the data, which is that the DOT miscoded or forgot to, 311 miscoded the pothole reports. There's no way to tell 311 that there's a problem with the data. You can't call up 311 and tell them, fix the 311 data, and I know that because we tried it, okay? And it didn't work. We tried it. We had someone call a whole bunch of times. Now, we know how to do it because we can call people at City Hall and get them to fix stuff, but that's dumb. because this is about fairness. It's not about privileged users or trusted users or the elite having a way to change the system. It's about everyone. So the absence of a feedback system in which the public can report problems with data is a big, big problem. And since the open data law and the open data portal were put up in 2012, we have not had a reliable feedback mechanism, or at least until Andrew Nicklin, who managed the portal, left whenever he left the city. Whenever you left the city, no one's been there. So we were talking about agile policy development and continual evolution. And one of the key ideas behind open data is that the public is helping as a feedback mechanism, right? You're helping to clean the data, you're finding problems with it, you're acting as a free consultant. You're kind of like the mollusk in the ocean that's breathing ocean water and making it cleaner, right? You're supposed to be there to help. It ain't happening. The feedback loop is completely broken. And a result of that, there is no evolution in the data. Other problems, big problems. So I'm sharing this with you because some of the folks in this room I happen to know are working on open data projects in other cities and other places, and I think it's useful to know like what actually stops you in your tracks. No feedback mechanism, problems with data. Where do you go with that, right? Other issues include the fact that the city is keeping 3 data sets, 3 copies of the different versions of the same data set, which is a waste of money and not taking example of the efficiencies. So you have an agency keeping a data set, you have the data set posted to the open data portal, and then you have a data set that's used internally by the Mayor's Office of Data Analytics in their DataBridge database, which is the interagency database, and which has a lot of data cleaning and uniform geolocation. It's been through a parser, and the geodata is much, much better. So the public is seeing the public copy of a data set, which is a little weird when you think about it, to have to keep 3 copies of the open data of a data set. So that there's a dysfunction in that aspect of it too. The other big problem is that there just aren't enough people in New York City government working on open data 100% of the time. In fact, there are 0 as we understand it. There's a number of people who are charged with it partially, but the folks in the Mayor's Office of Data Analytics who have this as their main responsibility are also responsible for data analytics. They're the folks that pulled together the analysis of when Legionella hit, or when there was the mayor's universal pre-K, and a number of big mayoral initiatives. So they get pulled off of open data all the time, and there's an absence of continuity. So we have this great law, we have this super robust civic society, lots of enthusiasts, we have a very high level of goodwill and collegiality between the council members, the advocacy groups, and the domain experts. I mean, all the people are pretty much on the same team here, but we don't have is actually good implementation by the city administration. And why is that? One reason is because the agencies are totally uninterested in open data as far as we can tell, other than as kind of an annoying mandate. They don't have what the bureaucrats like to call alignment. And I go to lots of meetings where people talk about, you have to find alignment. And I always walk away and feel like I'm spiritually bereft or something. I don't have alignment. But alignment means, how is this helping agencies meet their mission, provide their basic service, provide their basic data to other agencies or to the mayor's management report. And right now, agencies are not seeing how open data saves them effort, time, money. And I'll give you an example right now of a place where this is like incredibly explicitly clear. Police department. I noticed the police data is a huge interest for data and society folks. We've worked with the police department on their data release for 7 major crimes that they put up earlier this year, or late last year, I guess it was now. And the cops spent a lot of time on privacy and best practices and interviewing people, including people in this room, on best practices for data and what to do to protect the victims of sex crimes. Do you assign the crime location to the nearest precinct house, to the nearest intersection, all these things like this. They put out lots of data. It's pretty cool. Lots of people have been using it. And then just last week, the cops put out CompStat 2.0. How many of you have seen CompStat 2.0? CompStat 2.0 has no downloadable data. The sex crimes are assigned to the nearest intersection instead of to precinct houses, which is what the previous policy review the cops had determined. So they obviously didn't use any of the open data research that had been done for that at all. It's not particularly good as a portal. So it's not real transparency, and it's not open data. Now, that tells you that the NYPD is not feeling a lot of pressure to have an open data regime as such, because it didn't occur to them to provide downloadable, machine-readable data with CompStat 2.0, where the mayor and the police commissioner were at, okay? That's a recent example of that. So agencies, we do not believe are perceiving the value to themselves with making data open. How do they do that, though? So very quickly, roads forward, things that they could be doing that would make it valuable and useful to them. Looking at their FOIL requests, reducing FOIL, big efficiency for agencies would be to get fewer FOIL requests. An analysis of FOIL logs, which is something that we do, shows that in a bunch of different agencies, especially agencies dealing with infrastructure, you have a handful of the public, usually businesses, that are making an extraordinarily disproportionate number of FOIL requests. So for instance, the State Environmental Agency, 3 businesses were making 20% of all their FOIL requests. So roughly a couple thousand FOIL requests a year for 3 data sets. So there's a simple analysis to do right off the bat. Look at your FOIL requests and see if there's some of the data sets that you can put online. Federal agencies are doing this right now, actively, is our understanding. Some New York City agencies have done it, but that's one thing that you can do. Look at your web analytics. What are people hitting on your own website in a PDF form? We crawled the police department website and we found, I think, 217 PDF data sets on it. I think that number, maybe it was 417. It doesn't matter. Almost, many of them had broken links. Many of them were outdated. It was just a motley collection of that. But we asked the cops to look at the web analytics on it, and it turns out that people are actually looking at some of them. How about that? So looking at your web analytics and looking at what data you have in PDF form will give you a clue towards what you should release. And this is a simple thing. And then looking at 311 requests. 311 requests to your agency and related data. And what are your FAQs for your agency? Those are some of the things that you can do right off the bat that no New York City agency is doing in a methodical way to reduce, to make information more easily available to the public. So what we want to see happen is that the city have 5 or 6 people whose full-time job is open data. And that means what? It means that we would have an open data director for New York City who was on par with the head of the mayor's office of data analytics, and whose job was to connect the dots between agencies, see easy opportunities, which are an abundance of. I mean, everyone here knows there are a million cool things you can do when you unsilo data, and people start looking at them and they start mashing them up in different kinds of ways. That's what you guys do here. Well, the same data that is hard for you to get is also hard for government to get. So there's a massive government-to-government open data play. In fact, it's the one we think is ultimately the most valuable, and that's where we can achieve our fabled alignment, which is to reduce the friction and the cost of intergovernmental data retrieval. So there's a ton of opportunities in there that require smart people. So Amsterdam, I believe, has 5 to 7 people working full-time on open data. New York City, 0 people full-time on open data. So it's all right there. It's just a matter of the mayor's office discovering that. Now, circling back to you and in this room and the very beginning of the discussion. Now, I'm going to bet you that Brad Reed and the other folks from City Council have not heard much from most of you or any of you about open data needs. I'm going to guess that you have not asked your City Council member or City Council or an agency for a data release. Now, I could be wrong, but I'm going to guess that that's true. Because when we ask agencies how many times they get requests for data releases, the answer is oftentimes, nobody ever asks us for that. Now, they may be lying to us, but what we do know is that the people who are the super data consumers, be they journalists, be they people in academic research or think tank environment like you, are not an organized or semi-organized or loud voice for data release right now in New York City. Now, you may be elsewhere. You may be screaming and shouting all over the world right now. I don't know. But I do know in New York City right now that when it comes time to show up at a city council hearing, or when it comes time to have any kind of oversight for the city on data release, we're not hearing from you. So I guess my challenge to you would be this. Can you ask your city council member? Because this does not take a revolution. This is easy stuff. We're talking easy peasy stuff here, because government is hearing from so few people on this issue right now, and we're doing so well. See, that's the thing. We're kicking butt with hardly anybody doing anything. So just a little bit more would help a lot. It really would. This is an area where we don't need to do a lot of marching around and stuff. But what we do need to do is to make sure that even regular city council members or city council staff hear, oh, I asked the Department of Transportation for this data set and it never happened. That is important to do. So in terms of connecting dots, a dot that we would like to connect is for you to be able to get in touch with city council and find ways to get in touch with the mayor's office so that you can get the data you want, but when you ask for it, it gets liberated for everyone, not just for you. So I'm going to conclude my remarks with that right there, and then hopefully, I left 1,000,001 questions unanswered, because I certainly have quite a few. So that's that, and then let's talk.
Great. Thanks, Sean. Who's got questions? I get to be Donahue again.
Hi, I teach classes for the civil service and data analytics, and as part of it, it kind of becomes like group therapy around this. And I think one of the things that you mentioned, like the silent majority, which are in this room, I think another kind of silent force for change is actually people in agencies. I've had people in my classes tell me how it's easier for them to go get data from the open data portal than from another office in their own agency to be able to do their work, like their mandated required work. And I see that as kind of a failure of data governance and data stewardship within agencies. And I'm sure there's plenty of blame to go around about like funding and policy and all these other kinds of things. It's unfortunate, given the infrastructure we have, to notion you're supposed to support this or do it, MODI, MODA, all in Technology Development Corporation, everything, that this is still an issue where there isn't good data governance. And I think kind of expand on what you were kind of touching on with like the FOIL piece, which is very important. FOIL officers are mostly lawyers. They're not data people. They don't own the data. They're not stewards. They have to go through those people. And it's often a problem for them, just the mechanics of it, let alone the politics of it, is to have these good data governance issues. And so I would encourage, I think it's important when these come up to be able to say like, oh, you're going to buy this new multi-million-dollar data system or whatever. Okay, what are you going to do that's going to make the data easy to share within government and also support our open data policies and sharing around? Because they really, like in San Francisco, right, the idea of the open data should work for the city agencies themselves, the people who are working in government, more so than the public. So I guess my question for you is, what do you see and what do you hear around the same idea of serving beyond just FOIL, like the city needs around with the data, open data could provide?
So our what we call this is real chief information officer. What we think that should be the norm for government agencies of the 21st century is that they have a CIO, a chief information officer, who thinks about all of an agency's offerings to the public, everything from your website to your social media to your push emails to your open data offerings to your FOIL, and holistically, and is one person with a staff and office, and their job is to take down silos. Now, the way it works right now is that government in the United States is modeled in this way so that they do have a chief information officer. They're called, or a PIO, a public information officer, and their job is dealing with the press. That's all they do with. So there's no so there's a person, a press person at government agencies, and this is everywhere, but there's nobody that is that person for the public, that is a true public information officer. So the opportunities that you're talking about have to be realized by someone close to a commissioner who can say, we could save money in this show, that we could save person hours, we could do all of these things. It's not happening at all right now. And there's no one, as far as we can tell, in City Hall who is trying to create this even as a model or a pilot within any agency. So open data is one part of the how do we give information to the public picture, and it's not working so great in that way.
So the Department of Transportation puts out parking ticket information. So I went on the website.
Department of Finance does.
I thought it was DOT who puts, okay. Department of Finance puts that out. And there's certain information in there about the ticket itself. But one of the key elements that's missing is the cop or the cop's badge number or tax ID. The reason I ask that is that in my particular case, my wife is disabled, have a disabled parking permit, and the cops give bogus tickets. So I wanted to go and look at, which cops give bogus tickets, how often they do that, and how often are tickets dismissed. But I can't get that information. What is the process to get that information added in there?
I don't know. That's
Is
a
there
good
process.
I don't think there's a process for that. I think that there's a ton of unanswered questions and edge case questions, and what you just brought up is one involving the disclosure of individual police officers' badge and as part of a field in a data set and ability to essentially track the conduct of an individual officer. That's not happening right now, but I don't know the path to do that, but there's people here that can start the conversation with you.
Okay, and the second thing is you asked us about the 311, how many of us use 311? I've used 311 a lot of times, but I get very frustrated with the lack of response. Before 311, I would contact an agency directly and get good results. With 311, I get a person in between who doesn't know how to connect to the correct department, or I can't speak to that department anymore like I used to in the past. So.
Great, thanks. We'll also take off-the-record questions if anyone has them.
Thanks. I have so much to say, but I'll try to be concise. First, some other contexts of historical stuff. The first, I think, national FOIA was, I think it was Sweden or Denmark, and it was 200 years ago. And then the Obama Open Directive Initiative in 2009, it was signed in secrecy. It was off the official presidential calendar, which is totally bizarre and sends a really weird message. Anyway, back to the current times. In my last business, I made hundreds of FOIA requests and a couple lawsuits and other things. One thing I would just do is I'd make the same request. In the request, I'd say, for public transit information, schedule-related data, please note I'll be sending this request on the 5th of every month until time immemorial, please. And this was like a way kind of by regulatory fiat to get them thinking differently. And also going across so many jurisdictions, it was quite odd the way some cities would think about their FOIA legislation. So I think it was Pennsylvania, actually, at the state level. Everything was presumed private or presumed not shareable unless it's proven otherwise. And that seems to be kind of contrarian, but it represents, the kind of the political persuasion there. I'm also, question finally, is how much do you see the open data law as, it's a subset of what FOIL can provide in a sense, right? Like it doesn't have any, I understand the lack of teeth and enforcement, and it's great that it got through, but the ability to amend FOIL and make that more current and have more teeth in that. I mean, how much do you think about that and kind of going through 4 or 5 years ago with the creation of the open data law?
That's our obsession, the connection between FOIL and open data. And I think one of our staff's going to present on that at School of Data on Saturday. FOIL is, we've explicitly connected the two. It's a strategy that a number of people have used, including us, to get data sets released, which is to FOIL them and then to publish that actual data that you get and then to shame the government into putting it online. We did it with MTA procurement data at work. The MTA put the procurement data in the state open data portal. Other people did that with Pluto, Acris, and to help push internal efforts within the Bloomberg administration to do that. So that's a great strategy to do that. Nick, you want to comment? Nick used to be in the mayor's office, so he might have been there.
Yeah, I just had one question about costs. I know in the law there's a presumed no cost. A lot of this data is actually being sold right now when there is a very specific use case for it, and businesses can build on top of it. And you did great work in the report on how much it costs the government to provide this via FOIL as opposed to providing it publicly. But are you thinking, or has there been any thought about how to address those costs associated with when those revenue streams dry up from data that is being sold, that is known to be valuable and have buyers out there?
We have not seen any estimates from agencies. It's a great question. In other words, is it sustainable to have open data if the city is making money that supports data gathering and reporting efforts from licensing that data to private companies? And that's particularly relevant to real estate and housing in New York City. We have not looked at that carefully.
What kind of efforts, if any, are made to put interfaces between those data sets and then turn them into more useful public services, whether it's by the city or by organizations like you?
Well, so the city has a huge, and Nick, who was used to be at Mayor's Office of Data Analytics, and Andrew Nicklin, who was at Do It, can talk to you after. But the city does a ton of internal data analytics. There's been a revolution in the last 5 years, and in the city's capacity and expectation of internal data analysis. So one of the holy grails for public open data advocates is to get the city to release as much of its data bridge, which is it's an internal data share platform, as we can get. And that's where the clean data and the merged data and the analyzed data is. So we would love to see that happen. And I would also say that another thing we would love to see happen is to go with an open analytics philosophy and mentality, which says it's not just the data. We'll show you the algorithms that we're using when we do data analytics. So for instance, the fire department in New York has this fire spotter algorithm, which is pretty nationally famous example of data analytic use, and it rates every single building in New York City. It assigns a numerical scale for fire risk to them. Now, we don't get to see, we would love to see, not just we, but there's many people that love to see that list, and they would like to see the underlying assumptions in the algorithm and the data. Who wouldn't want to see where does my building score in fire risk? Of course, people would love to see. That's internal now to the fire department. So there's a lot of stuff like that going on that the public doesn't see.
So I guess that, sorry, one more, but I guess that brings up, like, how does privacy and encryption play into this?
How does privacy play into it?
I mean, how are we thinking about that? How are you thinking about that?
A lot. That is the fight, and it's a bit of an awkward fight, but and that's something there's people in this room can talk all about. Agencies have to make decisions about how publicly sensitive the data that they release is, and how much personally identifiable information is released right now. I would say that a lot of legislators are not aware how much data is made available through agency downloads or the open data portal, and there's quite a bit of personally identifiable information out there right now, and there is no very consistent policy on it. There's a lot of interpretation at different levels, but I would ask Andrew Nicklin if he wants to comment on that.
Hold on, microphone.
Yeah, I would agree that there are a lot of different levels of privacy at different areas of government. So, for example, I also worked for New York State for a little while, and it's actually state law that if you are a property owner, that your ownership information is public, and that's actually published on PDFs across local governments across the entire state. If that were to be turned into open data, it potentially lowers the barriers for abuse, and that's something that, as an open data program leader, you kind of need to think about. But at the same token, the law already says that information has to be made public, and we're just shifting the mechanism for how that could be done. So I think there are a lot of different expectations about that. And just on a quick other note, I don't think that a lot of agencies really have, and this is true for a lot of other cities that I work with as well, I don't think that they have a clear sense of, I think they understand that data is private and that there are sensitive concerns there are sensitivities to be concerned about. But I don't think that they have a clear set of tools and a clear set of methodologies to be able to say, okay, this is how I take data that is personally identifiable or personal health information, and I make it safe for public consumption, right? Either through anonymization or through data fuzzing or through other statistically valid practices. There's no toolkit for that at the moment. I mean, I think, obviously, Health and Human Services arena has a lot better of a shot at that, just simply because of HIPAA. But there's still a lot of just lack of knowledge about how to do that. And so there's a tendency to just err on the side of like, well, since we can't be sure that we're not releasing sensitive information and we can't be sure that it can't be reintegrated later through Mosaic type of work, we just won't bother at all. Or we just don't trust it to be safe enough, so we'll just say no.
I will also add that last month there was a hearing in front of City Council that talked about data privacy and data protection. The city apparently has an article in Harvard Business. Is it Social Business? I'm looking at you, Brad. Do you remember? You were there you were sitting across the table from me at that one. Yeah, I know. There's a hearing where I'll dig up the link and make sure that we attach it to the YouTube video here. But that talks about data privacy protections and how the city's exploring that. There were a couple of interesting back and forth in the sense that some of the civil society organizations didn't think that the bill as written like the bill as written to provide protection for individuals actually went too far in the sense that it would erode the opportunities that we've been created through open data. And now, as that bill has gone into committee, is now up for discussion and deliberation, and now there's an actual opportunity to work with the city council to kind of look at those areas and figure out whether or not we can strengthen that law that provides better protection as well as strengthens open data. I'm going to pass this off to Janet now.
Hi, I have a question about another concern related to open data, which is, and this is something I think that's discussed more perhaps in international circles than in the United States, about the concern that open data empowers the empowered. That is, that in order to really make use of open data and get something out of it, you need to have a certain level of skill and capability that is not actually available to most people in the United States, and certainly when you move abroad to developing countries is even less so. Obviously in New York City there is, and in many parts of the United States, there is a vibrant civic movement to make use of open data and to make it a social good rather than a beneficial only to corporations that have the resources to make use of it. And I'm just curious about whether, for you, from your perspective, does the value calculation on open data change if you do not have a vibrant civic sector that is acting as an intermediary between the public and the government?
No, and I'll tell you why. I think that that open data is very, very cheap. So when you look at the life cycle of a data set and the data collection and the compliance with the collection and the effort, that the actually making that open part is tiny. You know, you're talking decimal dust here in terms of the cost of the government creating that data set and maintaining it and archiving it. And the marginal benefit might not be huge when it's released if you're in a place where hardly anyone can use it, but hardly anyone could be one person. It could be one crusading journalist that could map, let's say, garbage service delivery or, you know, street cleanings or something available on any basic service delivery measure or transit service for that matter, anything like that. So, and that could have huge value for accountability for government service delivery if only one person knows how to do that, or two. So I don't think you need to have, you know, a grassroots base of users, though it would be great. And what Noel's trying to do here and what these CUNY guys are learning about is super duper important, because the great thing about data and technology is that the information can be, you know, dispersed, can be disseminated by a tiny number of people and analyzed by a tiny number of people. So I do think there's a humongous value proposition there. I also think that within government, there's a huge value proposition because government doesn't operate as a uniform, even in places that have authoritarian societies. Not every single facet of every government agency is pure evil or pure incompetence. You have lots of people of goodwill who just want to do their job. And open data helps them do their job. The more open it is, the more it helps them do their job. And this is, someone here, Richard perhaps mentioned this before, that there's a lot of support from rank and file data analysts for more open data to unsilo the data. So given the incredibly small cost of open data and open data release, technologically and governmentally, it's hugely worthwhile. It's huge upside. The resistance to open data and the cost numbers that you hear are from status quo bureaucrats and, you know, political powers that do not want the public to know what they are doing. And, you know, information is power, and they get that that open data is potentially revolutionary, and that is incredibly threatening. So the cost numbers, though, when you analyze them, are dinky everywhere for actually publishing data.
Great. How many more questions? Because we probably have time for like 3 more. I'm going to make sure.
Yeah, so question about the incentives of agencies to release their data. Right now it seems like it's kind of just an annoying task that they have to do. Do you think something can be done kind of along the vein of big apps where agencies can come out to the public with a challenge that they're facing that they want someone to take a look at, incentivizing them to release data that's accurate and also build something that's helpful to their agency.
Yeah, I think that big apps is great, and there should be all kinds of big apps type challenges that government engages in. I mean, anything that promotes agencies' interaction with a data using public or an enthusiastic public is very important. I mean, when you work with government agencies or within government, as everyone here can attest to, people in government are often surprised that there's a public interest. I didn't know anybody cared about that street cleaning schedule. Who knew? That's exciting to me. I mean, you have that constantly. So anything that promotes engagement of any kind is great. And if it helps government understand data use, then all to the better. The problem, though, is this one, which is that no one likes to be told what to do. Nobody. Not you, not me, not government agencies. So you have to be very careful because there's an aspect of threat. We're going to look at your data and tell you how you can improve, that kind of thing. Or the insights that we're going to show you are going to show you everything you do wrong. That's how they hear a lot of what the public does. So the kind of big apps challenges and agency challenges that you come up with have to be pretty carefully curated. But yes, you're absolutely right. This is a way of really increasing the tempo of change and creating a open data and really open government culture.
I guess as a follow-up, do you think that it would serve people better if the agencies came up with the questions themselves so that it wasn't framed as what are we currently doing wrong, but we have this question that we want answered and leave it more open-ended?
Yeah, sure. I mean, don't forget that most of the big agencies in New York City or the services they provide have advocates or stakeholder groups that watchdog them, that work with them, that contract with them, that engage with them all the time. And so there is an active discussion. It may not just necessarily involve people who are, open data aficionados or data analysts. So that discussion is often happening with different people. So part of I think the challenge for data in society and you folks is to be constantly interacting with domain experts, the transportation alternatives who do the crash mapping, by way of example. I mean, they know what data that they want already, and they're already working with the DOT to get that. You just may not talk to them about that.
And I think we're kind of in a golden age of that type of innovation thinking where agencies can engage with the public in an open and transparent way. Big apps kind of set the stage for that. The last administration's series of hackathons under the reInvent apparatus, maybe I'll just walk up here, where we had reinvent.nyc, which helped us rethink what the user interface for nyc.gov looks like. Reinvent Payphones, which is producing municipal wireless mesh networking, the little kiosks, and rethinking that. What was the third? Wasn't there a three? Reinvent 311, which was to think through how 311 could be more porous and participatory. And this year, we're going to hear 311 get the announcement of the 311's new application and more APIs into 311, so that way you don't have to necessarily call one central function. That function can exist in a number of different applications. This administration has taken that to heart, and so Big Apps is more community-oriented to solve kind of community-based issues as well as government-based issues. And then I think that we can also see the 3-4 people from the city council also taking that to heart as another representative of thinking through how can New York City Council's laboratory, or how do I say this, the New York City Council labs can rethink its footprint and be more participatory. So I think we're at that golden age. We're starting to see how government can be more participatory. I hope to God that we can have, oh God, Allah, and everything else above, that we can have successive administrations be as open and engaged with the public, and that we don't ever go back to a very dictatorial, authoritative, kind of like, we're government, we know better than what the people do. And so I'm going to give Joel, no? Okay, sorry, Joel. I just want to say thank you, Data and Society. Sorry, Joel. Sorry. Thank you, Data and Society. Thank you, Data and Society staff. It's been a real honor and pleasure to have this opportunity as a fellowship to be able to explore these types of ideas and to get a little bit more traction in a national community and an international community. So from the bottom of my heart, on camera, thank you. And then let's give a closing round of applause to John.